Now, there could be almost 1 billion extra people in the world within the next 12 years. That's according to a new report on population trends published by the United Nations. And the figure is set to keep rising by the middle of the century. There could be almost 10 billion people on the planet. China is the world's most populous country today, but experts say India will surpass it within 15 years. Well, China's population is set to peak at almost 1.5 billion by 2030, and from there it'll slowly drop back to about 1 billion by the end of the century. But it's Africa that may see the biggest changes, from a population of just over 1 billion today, quadrupling to more than 4 billion people by the year 2100. And that means Nigeria might have a larger population than the United States by the year 2050. And by the end of the century, it could be the world's second most populous country. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Robert Engelman. He's president of the Worldwatch Institute, an environmental research group based in Washington, D.C. Robert Engelman, a quick question first on the overall report, an extra 1 billion people in the next 12 years. How surprised are you by the absolute numbers, and how significant is it that the growth is largely going to be from developing countries?
Well, no one, of course, really knows exactly how many people are going to be alive on the planet in 2025 or 2050, or certainly not 2100, even UN demographers. What is really most interesting about this isn't so much the projections for what may happen in the future as the current demographic conditions, what's happening now in population, that led the UN demographers, who make these estimates every 2 years, to increase their projections on what's likely to be coming in the developing world, particularly. What's happening is that fertility is higher in a number of countries, particularly in Africa, the already high fertility countries in Africa, than demographers had really understood even just a few years ago. So they're looking at fertility trends, and they're actually upping their best guess as to what will happen, particularly in the developing world. That's what's really most surprising about this report. UN demographers have been continually now over the past decade or so raising their best guess on how many people will be alive in Africa and as well in parts of Asia and Latin America in 2025, 2050, and 2100. That's a bit surprising.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Africa there, Robert. I mean, the report says Africa will see the biggest changes. I mean, the figures are extraordinary, aren't they? I mean, 4 billion people by the end of the century. Is this explosive growth all down to fertility then?
No, one of the things that's happening here is there's something of a disconnect between the way the demographers look at these projections and what's likely to happen, and other scientists looking at things like climate change, scarcity of resources, as you're already seeing being an issue between Egypt and Ethiopia right now. This has been in the headlines. Emerging diseases. A number of scientists expect it's going to be extremely difficult to maintain our currently relatively high and increasing life expectancies over the 21st century. There's a lot of concern, particularly about what climate change will do to vulnerable populations over the 21st century. And yet UN demographers tend to look at the past and say, well, life expectancy has always been increasing the last couple of centuries or more, so we project that it will continue to increase. I think we have to ask ourselves, I mean, Africa is an enormously innovative, resourceful country, and Africans are doing a wonderful job, particularly in the area of economic growth right now. But can Nigeria really support a much larger population than the United States is expecting in 50 years? Can Africa itself quadruple its population? That's a really important question that we're not asking.
Yeah, it is an important question. I mean, many of Africa's socioeconomic problems are already exacerbated by overpopulation. So, I mean, just tell us, what sort of challenges will Africa face with this population explosion?
Well, I think water for food is one of the biggest ones, and that's unfolding right now in this emerging water dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt. Ethiopia is building a hydroelectric dam that's very popular in that region of Africa. In East Africa, Kenya and other countries are going to benefit from having a dependable supply of electricity that they have not had in many parts yet as to now. But Egypt is looking at its extreme vulnerability to the flow of the Nile, its dependence on the Nile, which has only increased as Egypt's population population has continued to grow fairly rapidly in the last few decades, and you're seeing some saber rattling happening now that Egypt is saying, Ethiopia, you can't build a dam even in your own territory because we're afraid of what it'll do in the Nile. Africa has a fair amount of arable land, but it's suffered a lot of mining of nutrients over the years as it continually struggles to feed its growing population. So the real question is, can the world come together and do two things that I think are critical? One is support the population that is in fact growing, and the other is to make sure that women around the world are only having the children they themselves really want to have, because one of the sort of silent stories about this high fertility in Africa is that there's a lot of unintended pregnancy, a lot of women having more children than they really want to have.
Robert Engelman, thank you.